The sun-dappled roads of Millbrook look the same in 2012 as they had in 1972, except for the abandoned Brenner house with its sagging porch where a man once stood watching. 3 little girls had walked that tree-lined path 40 years ago, hand in hand, ribbons in their hair, the youngest clutching a worn stuffed rabbit. They vanished 3 days later. The town blamed Raymond Walker, the strange Vietnam vet who lived across the street. But Raymond knew what he saw that day, fear in those children's eyes as they approached their foster home. Now, as workers drain the old well behind the Brenner property, something catches in the afternoon light. A small, mud-caked object that shouldn't be there. A child's stuffed rabbit, preserved in the dark waters for decades. Before we dive in, I'd really appreciate it when you subscribe. It makes such a difference for small creators like me and helps me continue sharing these stories with you. Thanks a lot. Millbrook, Pennsylvania hadn't changed much since 1972. Same main street, same courthouse, same suspicions that clung to Raymond Walker's small house across from where the Brenner family once lived. Back then, Raymond was 32, a Vietnam veteran with nightmares he couldn't shake and a watchful gaze that made townsfolk uneasy. He kept to himself, except when it came to those 3 sisters, Emma, Sophie, and Lily Maxwell, aged 10, 8, and 6. The girls had arrived in early summer after their parents died in a head-on collision on Route 16. With no relatives stepping forward, the state placed them with the Brenners as temporary foster parents until permanent arrangements could be made. Raymond noticed things others didn't. How Mr. Brenner's smile disappeared when officials left. How Mrs. Brenner gripped Sophie's arm too tightly in the grocery store. How the girls stopped playing in the yard after the first week. He reported his concerns to Sheriff Dawson twice. Both times the sheriff dismissed him. "Your mind's playing tricks again, Walker. Those combat memories getting mixed up with real life." Then came that evening in late July. Raymond sat on his porch as the girls walked the path toward the Brenner house. Emma in the lead, her face set and serious. Sophie following, eyes down. Little Lily at the rear, clutching her stuffed rabbit, Mr. Floppy. Looking back once with wide, frightened eyes that locked with Raymond's. It was the last time anyone saw them alive. 3 days passed before the Brenners reported the girls missing. 3 days that would haunt Raymond for decades. "They must have run away," Mr. Brenner told Sheriff Dawson on his front porch, voice carrying across the street to where Raymond stood listening. "Probably trying to find distant relatives. We've been nothing but good to them." Mrs. Brenner dabbed at dry eyes with a handkerchief. Such troubled girls. Their parents' death hit them hard. The town mobilized. Search parties combed the woods. Volunteers dragged the creek. Dogs sniffed through abandoned barns. Sheriff Dawson organized it all with grim efficiency, directing resources, talking to reporters. But Raymond saw how the sheriff's gaze kept drifting toward his house. The knock came at dusk on the 4th day, 4 deputies with a search warrant. They tore through Raymond's home, flipping mattresses, emptying drawers, checking the crawl space with flashlights. "Where were you Tuesday night, Walker?" Sheriff Dawson demanded, towering over Raymond at the kitchen table. Raymond's mouth went dry. Tuesday night he'd had an episode, a bad one. The fireworks from the county fair had sent him spiraling. He'd fled to the woods, spent hours curled against a fallen oak, fighting memories of gunfire and screams. "I was out walking," he said weakly. "All night. Nobody saw you?" I needed to clear my head. Sheriff Dawson's radio crackled. A deputy's voice, "Sheriff, we found something in the shed." The crowd gathered outside watched as a deputy emerged, holding a small pink sock in a plastic bag. "That's not mine," Raymond said, his voice rising. "I've never seen it before. Someone planted that." But he saw it in their eyes. The certainty, the judgment, the fear turning to hatred. Deputy Michael Collins, youngest on the force, looked uncomfortable, glancing between the sock and the triumphant expression on the sheriff's face. Within hours, rumors spread through Millbrook. Raymond Walker had taken those poor orphaned girls. Raymond Walker had done unspeakable things. Raymond Walker was a monster hiding in plain sight, and no one would believe otherwise for 40 long years. They arrested Raymond the next morning. His house was surrounded by angry townspeople who spat on the patrol car as it pulled away. Someone threw a rock that cracked the back window. For 2 weeks, he sat in the county jail while investigators searched for evidence, any evidence that could tie him conclusively to the girl's disappearance. They found nothing. No blood. No clothing beyond that single sock. No witnesses who saw Raymond with the girls. Not even a motive that made sense. "Why would I hurt them?" Raymond asked repeatedly during interrogations. "I was trying to protect them." After 17 days, the district attorney reluctantly admitted they lacked sufficient evidence for charges. Raymond was released to a town that had already convicted him in the court of public opinion. He returned to a house with "Child Killer" spray-painted across the front. His windows were broken. Someone had poisoned his dog. The case remained open for 3 months before gradually sliding into the cold file drawer. The Brenners announced they were moving away in October, telling neighbors they couldn't bear to remain surrounded by such painful memories. Sheriff Dawson officially classified the Maxwell sisters as runaways in November. Likely sought family in another state, the report concluded. No evidence of foul play. 2 weeks after the case closed, Sheriff Dawson announced his early retirement, citing health concerns. He moved to Florida the following spring. Most people would have left Millbrook. Raymond stayed. "Leaving means they win," he told Deputy Collins, who'd stopped by, the only person in town who still spoke to Raymond. "Leaving means those girls never get justice." Raymond converted his dining room into what he called his war room. He pinned maps to the walls, created timelines, collected newspaper clippings, made notes of everything he could remember about the Brenners and the Maxwell sisters. In December, he drove to the county records office and requested information about other foster children placed with the Brenners. The clerk was reluctant, but eventually revealed they'd fostered 11 children over 6 years. "What happened to them?" Raymond asked. "Relocated," the clerk said. "Moved to permanent placements elsewhere." Raymond spent Christmas Day parked outside the Records building in Pittsburgh, waiting for it to reopen. When it did, he discovered something disturbing. 6 more children had passed through the Brenner's home before they came to Millbrook, all relocated after short stays. 17 children in total. No follow-up addresses, no names of new foster families, just relocated, stamped in red. Something was very wrong with the Brenners, and Raymond suspected Sheriff Dawson had known all along. Millbrook changed slowly over the decades. The paper mill closed. A tech company opened offices downtown. New housing developments sprawled along the eastern ridge, but some things remained constant, like the townsfolk's sideways glances at Raymond Walker's house. By 2012, Raymond was 72, his hair white, his back bent, his eyes still sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. His war room had expanded to include 2 filing cabinets and boxes of research. He'd followed every lead, written countless letters to officials, filed multiple Freedom of Information requests. No one had listened. Until Megan Harris arrived in town. Megan was 36, a journalist for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, assigned to write about rural Pennsylvania towns reinventing themselves. She first noticed Raymond sitting on his porch, watching construction crews across the street. The old Brenner property had been purchased by developers planning to convert it into a quaint bed and breakfast. The location was perfect, close to the new hiking trails, walking distance to Main Street. "That place has history," Raymond told Megan during their first conversation. "Not the kind tourist would enjoy." Something in his voice, the weight of decades, made her ask more questions. Meanwhile, the renovation hit a snag. Environmental testing revealed contamination in the old well behind the house. The water had turned foul, threatened to leach into the soil. The well needed to be properly drained and sealed. Raymond watched from his porch as workers set up pumps. He hadn't slept in 3 days. The call came at 2:17 p.m. on a Tuesday. Frank Doherty, the site foreman, sounded shaken. "Mr. Walker, you might want to come over here." Raymond crossed the street slowly, leaning on his cane. The workers stood back from the well, faces pale. A collection of items lay on a blue tarp. Items the pump had drawn up from the muck at the bottom. A child's shoe, rotted but recognizable. Metal hair barrettes with butterfly designs. A plastic bracelet, and a mud-caked bundle of fabric and stuffing that Raymond recognized immediately. "Mr. Floppy," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Lily's rabbit." When the police dive team finished their work 3 days later, they had recovered 3 small skeletons from the well's muddy bottom. Dental records confirmed what Raymond had known for 40 years. Emma, Sophie, and Lily Maxwell had never run away. Sheriff Kate Wilson, no relation to her predecessor, handled the case with grim professionalism. She listened carefully when Raymond showed her his research. "I'm not saying I believe everything you're suggesting," she told him, "but I'm not dismissing it either. This is now an active homicide investigation." Megan's editor gave her the green light to pursue the story. Together with Raymond, she began unraveling 4 decades of secrets. The forensic anthropologist's report came first. The girls had not died immediately. Evidence of healed fractures suggested they had endured abuse for weeks or months before death. They had likely died within days of each other, probably from strangulation. "They were kept somewhere before they died," Dr. Larson explained. "Somewhere confined based on vitamin D deficiency markers in the bones." Raymond thought of the Brenner's basement with its small windowless rooms. He'd glimpsed it once through an open door, concrete walls, a heavy lock on the outside of one door. Next came the records Megan obtained through court orders, foster care placements spanning 15 years and 3 counties. 17 children had passed through the Brenner's care, all listed as successfully relocated to permanent homes. "But there's no record of where they went," Megan said, spreading papers across Raymond's dining room table. "No names of adoptive parents, no follow-up visits. It's like they vanished into thin air." "Like the Maxwell girls," Raymond said softly. The breakthrough came when Megan tracked down birth records for the fostered children. Cross-referencing with Social Security numbers, she found something chilling. None of the children had employment records, tax filings, or listed addresses after leaving the Brenners. Except one, a boy named Thomas Jenkins, who'd been with the Brenners in 1968. His record showed he'd died in a Minneapolis hospital 3 years later, severe physical trauma listed as cause of death. "That's when I knew," Raymond told Sheriff Wilson. "The Brenners weren't just abusers, they were killers." But the most damning evidence came when workers clearing the Brenner basement found a hidden room behind a false wall. Inside, chains bolted to the floor, scratch marks on the walls, and children's names carved into the concrete. Emma, Sophie, Lily, and 14 others. Raymond stood in that room, leaning heavily on his cane, tears streaming down his weathered face. "I knew something was wrong," he whispered. "I just couldn't prove it in time." That night, he pulled out a box he'd kept locked in his closet for 40 years. Inside were 3 items the police had returned after searching his home in 1972, items he'd been accused of stealing but had actually found discarded near his property line. A hair ribbon, a small diary with Emma's name inside the cover, and a school photograph of the 3 girls, smiling uncertainly at the camera. He handed the box to Sheriff Wilson. "I kept these safe. I thought someday they might help find the truth." As Wilson examined the diary, her expression hardened. "Mr. Walker, these pages mention other places, other children." The investigation was about to expand far beyond the small town of Millbrook. The diary changed everything. 10-year-old Emma Maxwell had documented her fears in careful handwriting. Using a simple code that Sheriff Wilson's team quickly deciphered, she wrote about the bad room in the basement, about children who disappeared in the night after Mr. Brenner took them downstairs, about whispered conversations between the Brenners and Sheriff Dawson. "Sheriff brings new kids sometimes," one entry read. "Mrs. B says they're special deliveries. They never stay long." The national media descended on Millbrook. Satellite trucks lined Main Street. Raymond's decades-long quest for justice became headline news. The pariah vindicated, the outcast proven right. But Raymond took no pleasure in the attention. "This isn't about me," he told reporters camped outside his house. "It's about those children. It's about what was allowed to happen here." The investigation expanded rapidly. Sheriff Wilson formed a task force with state police and FBI agents. They began tracking the children who had passed through the Brenner home, searching for remains, seeking records. Megan's research uncovered that the Brenners had moved 5 times between 1965 and 1972, always to small towns with minimal police resources, always taking in foster children, always leaving suddenly. "How many children are we talking about?" Sheriff Wilson asked during a task force meeting. "At least 37 that we can document," an FBI agent replied. "Possibly many more." Former Deputy Michael Collins, now 75 and battling terminal cancer, came forward with information he'd kept hidden for decades. He unlocked a safety deposit box containing photographs he'd secretly taken of Sheriff Dawson's interactions with the Brenners. "I was too scared to come forward then," Collins admitted from his hospital bed. "Dawson controlled everything in Millbrook. He would have destroyed me and my family." The photos showed Sheriff Dawson delivering children to the Brenner house at night, children who never appeared in official foster care records. "This wasn't just abuse," Megan told Raymond as they reviewed the evidence. "This was trafficking. Dawson was using his position to funnel vulnerable children to the Brenners. But for what purpose? The answer came from financial records subpoenaed from banks in 3 states. Large cash deposits to the Brenners' accounts. Similar deposits to Sheriff Dawson's, money traced back to shell companies and individuals connected to a network of illegal adoptions, and worse. They were selling children, Sheriff Wilson explained grimly. Some for adoption on the black market, others for more sinister purposes, the ones who fought back or could identify them. She didn't need to finish the sentence. The well behind the house told that story clearly enough. Raymond spent hours sitting beside the covered well, now surrounded by crime scene tape. Sometimes he spoke quietly, as if the girls could hear him. "I'm sorry I didn't save you. I'm sorry I didn't make them listen." The forensic team found more than just the girls' remains in the well. They discovered jewelry, clothing fragments, and personal items belonging to at least 4 other children. DNA testing was underway, matching against missing children's databases spanning 5 decades. "This is bigger than the Brenners," Megan said. "This is systematic, and it couldn't have happened without help from people in power." Searching through property records, they discovered that Dawson had purchased a luxury home in Florida just 1 month after closing the Maxwell sisters' case. The down payment, $50,000 in cash. His sheriff's salary at the time, $12,000 per year. While the investigation expanded, Raymond focused on the 3 girls whose faces had haunted his dreams for 40 years. He worked with Megan to piece together their short lives, their parents' death, their journey into foster care, their final months in the Brenner house. "They deserved better," Raymond said, arranging flowers at the temporary memorial that had sprung up near the well. All these children deserved better. As the extent of the crimes became clear, the citizens of Millbrook faced an uncomfortable truth. Their rush to blame the strange man across the street had allowed the real monsters to escape justice for decades. And those monsters had not worked alone. Records showed Mr. Brenner had died in 1994 from liver failure, his death certificate filed in Arizona, but Mrs. Brenner, Martha Brenner, had seemingly vanished. Until Megan found a marriage certificate dated 1975, Martha Brenner to William Williams in Tucson, Arizona, 3 years after fleeing Millbrook. She changed her name to Margaret Williams, Megan told the task force. Social Security records led them to Sunshine Valley Care Home outside Phoenix. Margaret Williams, age 86, suffered from early-stage dementia but had lucid days, according to staff. Sheriff Wilson arranged for extradition paperwork. Raymond insisted on accompanying them to Arizona. "I've waited 40 years to look her in the eye," he said, his voice firm despite his shaking hands. "I need to do this for Emma, Sophie, and Lily." The care home was all pastel colors and forced cheer. Margaret Williams sat in a sunroom, a thin woman with snow-white hair and gnarled hands that continuously pleated and unpleated a tissue. "Mrs. Brenner," Sheriff Wilson said, showing her badge, "we need to talk about the Maxwell sisters." The old woman's eyes remained vacant. "Emma, Sophie, and Lily," Raymond said, stepping forward, "the 3 little girls you and your husband killed in 1972. Something flickered in Margaret's eyes, recognition, then calculation. "I don't know what you're talking about. My husband James and I never—" "Your husband was Richard Brenner," Megan interrupted, placing photographs on the table. "These are the girls who lived with you in Millbrook, Pennsylvania, the girls whose bodies we found in your well." Margaret's face hardened. "If anything happened to those girls, Richard did it. I was just his wife. I was afraid of him too." "You deposited the money," Sheriff Wilson said, sliding bank records across the table. "Your signature, not his." "The hair ribbons were yours," Raymond added. "I saw you tying them in the girls' hair the day they arrived." Margaret's demeanor suddenly shifted. Her spine straightened. Her eyes sharpened. The confused old woman vanished, replaced by something cold and calculating. "You," she hissed at Raymond. "The nosy neighbor. Richard wanted to take care of you too, but Sheriff Dawson said framing you was more useful." The confession stunned everyone into momentary silence. "Why?" Raymond finally asked. "Why those girls? Why any of those children?" Margaret Williams, Martha Brenner, smiled thinly. The money was too good. Then her eyes rolled back. Her body stiffened. By the time the care home's medical staff arrived, she was unresponsive, felled by a massive stroke. As paramedics wheeled her away, she whispered something only Raymond heard. "Dawson chose them all. We just did the work." Margaret Williams died without regaining consciousness. She took many secrets to her grave, but enough had been revealed to expand the investigation dramatically. Sheriff Dawson had died in 2005, but his home in Florida yielded a hidden safe behind a bathroom tile. Inside cash, fake identification documents, and a ledger with children's names, dates, and dollar amounts. The code wasn't difficult to break. Higher amounts for clean children with no family connections. Lower amounts for problematic ones who required special handling. The Maxwell sisters fell into the latter category. Their entry in the ledger read, "Maxwell girls, 3, $7,500. Disposal required, attention drawn." He sold them to the Brenners, knowing they would be killed. Sheriff Wilson explained to the task force. The girls were asking questions, drawing attention. They became a liability. The FBI expanded their investigation to other jurisdictions where Dawson had worked before Millbrook. Similar patterns emerged: missing children, officials looking the other way, money changing hands. Megan's article for the Post-Gazette broke the story nationally. Decades of silence: how a rural Pennsylvania town enabled child trafficking ring. The piece detailed Raymond's 40-year quest for justice and the systematic corruption that had allowed dozens of children to disappear. Within days, similar investigations opened in 7 states. Back in Millbrook, Raymond faced his neighbors' shame and regret. People who had crossed the street to avoid him for decades now approached with tearful apologies. "I don't need your guilt," he told one former friend. "Those children needed your help 40 years ago." Working with forensic experts, Raymond helped reconstruct the final days of the Maxwell sisters. Emma's diary provided key details: the hidden room, the regular visits from Sheriff Dawson, the terrifying night when Mr. Brenner came for Lily first. 2 days later, he took Sophie. Emma's final entry, written in shaking handwriting: "I heard the well lid move last night. I'm next. If anyone finds this, please tell people what happened here." As news spread, former residents of Millbrook came forward with their own suspicions and memories: strange sounds from the Brenner house, children seen but then never seen again, concerns dismissed by Sheriff Dawson. An entire community chose not to see, Megan wrote in a follow-up article, and that choice had devastating consequences. For Raymond, vindication brought little comfort. In his kitchen, he told Megan the truth that haunted him most. "I could have done more. I should have broken into that house the night I saw their faces. I knew something was wrong, and I followed the rules instead of my conscience." On a crisp October morning, 40 years and 3 months after the Maxwell sisters disappeared, Millbrook gathered to remember them. The well had been sealed with concrete, a small garden planted around it, 3 stone angels marking the spot. Raymond, leaning heavily on his cane, placed 3 white roses at the base of the memorial. His hands trembled not from age, but from the weight of the moment. Sheriff Wilson had invited him to speak first. He declined. "I've said enough over 40 years, he told her. "Today should be about them, not me." The ceremony proceeded with prayers, poetry, and the reading of the girls' names. Then, surprising everyone, Raymond slowly made his way to the podium. "I didn't plan to speak," he began, his voice stronger than expected. "But last night I realized there's something you all should see." From a canvas bag, he removed 3 preserved items sealed in archival plastic: the hair ribbon, the school photograph, and Emma's diary. "The police thought these were evidence of my guilt in 1972, Raymond explained. "When they returned them, after finding nothing conclusive, I kept them safe. I thought someday they might help find the truth." He held up the diary. "This book contains more than just Emma's account of what happened here. It contains names, places, details about other children who passed through the Brenner's home." Sheriff Wilson stepped forward. "Mr. Walker shared this with us yesterday. Based on information in the diary, we've identified 12 additional locations across 5 states where children may have been trafficked or disposed of." A murmur passed through the crowd. "Emma Maxwell was 10 years old," Raymond continued, "but she was braver than all of us. Knowing what would likely happen to her, she documented everything. She hid this diary where she thought someone might find it, wrapped in plastic inside the toilet tank. The Brenners must have found it after her death and planted it among my things to incriminate me." He opened the diary to a marked page, but what they didn't realize was that Emma had written about other children, other houses. She created a record of every child who disappeared while she was there. Raymond's voice broke as he read from the diary. "April came today. She's 7, has red hair. Cries for her mom. Sheriff brought her after dark. Said her parents died in a fire. I don't believe him anymore." He turned the page. "April gone this morning. Mr. B took her downstairs last night. Mrs. B washed the sheets. They think we don't know what happens, but we do." The crowd stood in stunned silence. "Emma Maxwell left us a map," Sheriff Wilson explained. "Addresses she overheard, names she remembered, details that seem small to her but are proving invaluable to our investigation." Raymond carefully returned the diary to its protective covering. I failed these girls in life. I won't fail them in death. Every name in this book deserves justice." As the ceremony concluded, an elderly woman approached Raymond, her steps uncertain, her eyes wet with tears. "You don't remember me," she said softly. "I was Patty Duncan back then. I lived 2 streets over." Raymond studied her face. "I remember you. Your father worked at the mill." She nodded. "What you don't know is that I was almost one of them. Sheriff Dawson came to our house after my father died, told my mother he could place me somewhere nice while she got back on her feet." Her voice quavered. "She was considering it when my grandmother arrived and took us both to Ohio." She gripped Raymond's hand. "I could have been in that well. Others were because people didn't ask questions, because they trusted authority." Throughout the day, more stories emerged, more connections, more narrow escapes and troubling memories. The investigation continued to expand. Authorities in multiple states began examining cold cases involving missing children. Records were unsealed. Ground-penetrating radar was brought to sites identified in Emma's diary. At the end of the memorial service, Raymond stood alone by the sealed well, everyone else having departed for a community reception. "I kept my promise," he whispered to the 3 stone angels. "It took too long, but people know the truth now." As he turned to leave, Sheriff Wilson approached with a small box. "Forensics is finished with this," she said, handing him Lily's stuffed rabbit, now cleaned and partially restored. "We thought you might want to keep it." Raymond cradled the toy gently. It should stay with her. He placed Mr. Floppy carefully at the base of the smallest angel, arranging him so he seemed to be watching over the stone child. "No one's going to hurt you anymore," he promised, his words carried away by the autumn breeze. Winter came to Millbrook, snow blanketing the memorial garden in white. The investigation continued across state lines, a web of connections expanding outward from Sheriff Dawson and the Brenners. 17 additional victims had been identified. 5 more sites excavated. 3 former officials arrested for conspiracy and obstruction of justice. Raymond followed the developments from his hospital bed. Pneumonia, the doctors said. His body was simply worn out from age and decades of stress. Megan visited daily, bringing updates on the case and working on a book about the investigation. "They're calling it one of the largest trafficking rings ever uncovered in rural America," she told him. "All because you refused to give up?" Raymond shook his head weakly. "All because Emma Maxwell was brave enough to keep a diary." On a snowy December morning, the town council voted unanimously to rename the park adjacent to the old Brenner property. A stone marker would read, "Maxwell Sisters Memorial Park. May truth prevail over silence." Raymond didn't live to see the dedication. He passed peacefully in his sleep that night, 40 years and 5 months after making a silent promise to 3 frightened girls. At his funeral, hundreds gathered, many from out of town, connected to the case through lost children or narrow escapes. They placed white roses on his casket. Sheriff Wilson read a brief statement. Raymond Walker was judged unfairly by this community for 40 years. In the end, his persistence revealed a truth many preferred to ignore. He reminds us that sometimes the most heroic act is simply refusing to look away. Spring came early to Millbrook that year. At the memorial garden, 3 stone angels watched over the sealed well where crocuses pushed through the soil, white, purple, and yellow blooms surrounding a small, weathered stuffed rabbit that somehow survived winter's snow. That's the end. Would you have had the courage to stand alone for 40 years in pursuit of the truth? Share your thoughts in the comments. Hit subscribe to never miss a story that challenges what we think we know. Your next powerful narrative is waiting just a click away.